Do you want to know why some photographs feel alive? Why certain images stare back at you long after you've turned away, like they're waiting for you to blink first? I want you to picture a cold night in 1902, a man hunched over a wooden tripod in a forgotten Scottish village. His name was Alistair McCann, a quiet, glass-eyed photographer no one really trusted, but everyone needed. He specialized in memorial portraits, the Victorian practice of photographing the dead as if they were still alive. But what Alistair captured was something no man should ever see. One evening, as the wind cut across the moors, a grieving mother brought her young daughter to Alistair's small studio. The girl had died just hours before. Her body was cold, her face pale, yet when the plate was developed in the chemical bath, something appeared behind her, a shadowed figure with its hand on her shoulder. Not the mother, not anyone from the room. The rumors spread quickly. McCann's photographs didn't just capture faces. They captured the soul's final moments. The same patterns began appearing again and again, eyes wide with terror, silent mouths frozen mid-scream, pale silhouettes in the corners of the frame. By the time his name reached Edinburgh, Whispers claimed that every man or woman who sat for Alistair McCann was doomed to die within weeks, and the proof was etched into his negatives forever. You're about to see what those photographs revealed, but listen to me carefully. Once you understand what McCann discovered, you'll never look at a camera the same way again. You'll realize the device in your pocket right now is far more dangerous than you've ever been told, because what McCann stumbled upon was not an accident. It was the first recorded evidence of a system designed long before you were born, a system built to catalog, harvest and control. And the truth behind it didn't vanish with him in 1902. It's still operating, and it's watching you. Are you ready to see what they never wanted you to know? The first surviving account of the voices came from a boy named Caleb Hargreaves. He was 8 years old when he entered the orphanage after his parents died in a mill accident, and just 12 when he disappeared. Before he vanished, he told another child what the walls had been telling him. Caleb said the voice wasn't like a whisper in the ear. It was closer than that, inside his head but not his own. It would begin at night when the building went silent, and at first it only asked questions. Are you afraid? Do you want to be free? Would you leave if I opened the door? The voice was soft, soothing, like a friend. It knew Caleb's fears, his hopes, even the memories of his parents' faces. He never questioned how. And then it started to give instructions. Hide the key beneath your mattress tonight. Do not speak when the matron comes, she will not see you. Stay awake, someone will knock 3 times on the wall. Caleb followed every order, and every time he did, something happened, things that shouldn't have been possible. One night the voice told him to climb into the dumbwaiter in the kitchen after everyone was asleep. He did, and when he pulled himself out, he found food waiting on the counter, bread and cheese meant for the matrons. Another night it led him to a locked storeroom in the basement. When he touched the door, it clicked open as though the lock had been waiting for him. Caleb told the others about the voice. Some believed him, most didn't. But everyone noticed the same thing. The closer he got to the walls, the more distant he became. He stopped talking during the day. He would sit upright in bed long after the other children had fallen asleep, head tilted toward the cracked plaster, as though listening for instructions. And then one morning, his bed was empty. No footprints in the snow, no broken locks or open windows, just an undisturbed pillow and a blanket folded neatly at the foot of the bed, as if he had packed himself away. And Caleb was only the first, because the voice had been calling others too. After Caleb, the disappearances became more frequent. At first, the matrons assumed the children were running away together. It was easier than admitting they had no control. They increased curfews, barred the windows, even bolted the doors at night. But the vanishings didn't stop. Sometimes an entire bed would be left untouched, the pillow perfectly smooth, no signs the child had even slept there. Other times a blanket would be rumpled, as if the child had been pulled from it mid-dream. By spring, 12 children were gone. The county refused to intervene. They called it poor record-keeping, blamed the orphanage staff, and moved on. In 1891, orphan lives didn't carry much weight, but the children who remained noticed a pattern no one else did. The ones who vanished had all slept in the same wing of the building, an older edition with ceilings lower than the rest, and walls made of thick stone. It was colder there, even in summer, and the floors creaked differently underfoot, and the voices were louder. One girl, May Densmore, later testified to a county investigator that she heard knocking in the walls at night, rhythmic and deliberate, like someone signaling from the other side. When she told the matrons, they slapped her and called her a liar. But the knocking grew louder. May said she could hear words now, muffled but distinct, and she swore the voice was calling her name. She tried to block it out. She stuffed rags into her ears, buried her head beneath the pillow, prayed to a god she wasn't sure was listening. But every night the voice returned, and every night it promised the same thing. I can take you where they can't hurt you. I can set you free. May didn't know what that meant, but she knew what happened to the others who'd listened. So she started paying attention to the building instead of the voice. That's when she noticed something. It's strange. The floor plan didn't make sense. There were doors that led nowhere, hallways that ended in blank walls. Some rooms had windows painted black from the outside, and the walls themselves. She swore she could feel them breathing. May was only 11, but she was sharper than most adults. She began to map the orphanage in secret, scratching lines into the back of her bed frame with a nail she'd stolen from the kitchen. What she found made no sense. The building looked ordinary from the outside, 3 floors, a cellar, and 2 wings, but the interior didn't match the exterior. Entire hallways curved back on themselves. Rooms had walls thicker than they should have been, and some staircases led to locked doors set into solid stone. May started marking the walls with chalk at night, little symbols to see if she was retracing her steps. And that's when she realized the walls weren't just walls. They shifted. Sometimes she'd return to a marked spot the next day, and the symbol would be gone, as if the plaster had absorbed it. Other times, she'd find the same symbol in a completely different hallway, as if the building had moved it. One night, desperate for answers, she pressed her ear against a wall in the east wing and waited. At first there was nothing. Then, faint and wet, she heard breathing. Not wind, not pipes. Breathing. Slow, deliberate, listening to her. She pulled back, heart hammering, but the wall whispered her name. May. It was closer than she'd ever heard it. She bolted for her bed, but halfway down the hallway she saw it, a hairline crack in the plaster splitting downward like a vein. Something behind it was moving. She grabbed a lantern and held it up. Through the crack, just for an instant, she swore she saw an eye staring back at her. May didn't sleep that night. She lay awake, watching the walls in case they opened up and swallowed her like they had the others. The next morning she tried to tell the matrons again. She begged them to send for help to let her leave. But instead they locked her in the cellar for disrupting order, and in the darkness, the walls were louder than ever. You know now, the voice whispered. So you must choose. May didn't answer. But the walls didn't need her permission, because by then they had already decided. The cellar was the coldest place in the orphanage. The floor was packed dirt, and the ceiling was so low May had to crouch. Rusting pipes wept condensation in the shadows, dripping onto her shoulders as she sat shivering. She thought she was alone, but the longer she stayed, the clearer it became that she wasn't. The whispers were louder down here. They didn't come from a single direction. They slithered through the walls, the ceiling, the floor, surrounding her like a swarm of insects. You are close now, May, the voice said. She pressed her hands over her ears, but it didn't help. Don't be afraid. We'll show you. May didn't answer. She focused on the small window at the far end of the cellar, its glass thick with grime. If she could break it, maybe she could crawl through and escape. But then she heard the sound, a dragging noise, slow and deliberate, like something heavy being pulled across the dirt. She turned, holding up the lantern. Its weak flame barely lit the room, but she could see impressions forming in the ground, as though invisible hands were pressing into the soil. "They left us here," the voice said. "They built over us. They forgot." May backed against the wall, trembling. The lantern flickered and went out. Now there was only darkness, and in the darkness she could hear it, the same breathing she'd heard in the walls, but closer, much closer. Something brushed against her ankle. Cold, wet. May kicked at it and scrambled away, her back slamming into a section of wall that felt soft. The whispers were deafening now. "Join us, May." The wall behind her pulsed. She pushed herself away and felt her hands sink into the plaster like it was made of clay. There were things moving inside. She could feel them crawling over her fingers. May screamed. The matrons found her the next morning in the center of the cellar, curled into a ball, whispering the same phrase over and over. "The walls are hungry. The walls are hungry. The walls are hungry." But the cellar door had been locked all night, and no one could explain how May had moved from the corner where they'd left her. May didn't know how long she ran that night. The orphanage seemed endless now, a labyrinth twisting in on itself, every hallway unfamiliar. Doors led her in circles, staircases climbed to nowhere. She felt like a mouse trapped in the belly of a beast, and she knew it was only a matter of time before it closed its jaws. But then she found the door. It was hidden behind a torn tapestry in the east wing, a narrow wooden frame nearly invisible in the shadow. It shouldn't have been there. She'd walked this hallway hundreds of times and never noticed it. She pushed it open, expecting another dead end. Instead, she found a passage descending deep into the foundations of the orphanage. The air grew colder as she crept downward, the stone steps slick with moisture. The walls here were not plaster or wood, but black rock, wet and glistening like something alive. And then she heard them, not whispers this time, screams. Dozens of voices crying out from somewhere ahead, echoing through the stone. May's lantern flickered as she stepped into a vast underground chamber, and there they were, the missing children. But they weren't whole anymore. Their bodies were fused into the walls, their faces stretched and frozen in silent agony, their fingers clawing at the stone as though trying to escape. May staggered back, choking on a sob. The walls pulsed. "They're part of us now," the voice said. She spun, searching for the source, but there was nothing. Only the walls, shifting and swelling like lungs. "They listened," the voice continued, "and we took them, just as we will take you." May shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Why? Why us?" The walls trembled, and for a moment she swore she could feel them smiling. "Because you are small enough to forget, because no one will come looking, because your fear feeds us." The children's mouths opened as one, ran, releasing a sound that was not a scream, but a roar of hunger. May dropped the lantern and ran. But in the darkness, the walls closed in, narrowing the passage behind her, herding her deeper into the orphanage's heart. May's breath came in ragged bursts as she sprinted through the twisting stone passages, the roar of the walls echoing behind her. The orphanage was awake now, fully awake. And it wanted her. The walls shifted with every step, narrowing so tightly she had to turn sideways to slip through, scraping her shoulders raw against the jagged rock. Behind her, she could hear the faint dragging of small feet, dozens of them, as if the fused children were peeling themselves from the walls to follow. She didn't look back. Up ahead, a faint light flickered. She stumbled toward it, praying it was the way out, but when she burst into the chamber, she froze. It wasn't an exit. It was a sanctum. The room was circular, its ceiling lost in shadow. Every inch of the walls was covered in symbols carved deep into the stone, their grooves filled with a black tar-like substance that pulsed in time with her heartbeat. And in the center, rising from the ground like a pillar, was something she couldn't understand. It wasn't alive. It wasn't dead. It was both. A mound of bodies, decayed, skeletal, interwoven into a single form. Their skulls twisted upward like worshippers frozen in eternal prayer. May staggered back, her stomach lurching. The voice was deafening now. "Do you see, May? This is what they built us for. This is what we have always been." The mound shuddered, and May realized with horror that it was growing. New bodies forcing their way out from the stone, stretching, fusing with the rest. Children's faces. The missing children. May bolted for the far side of the chamber, clawing at the walls, desperate for an exit. But the stone shifted beneath her hands, opening a narrow slit just wide enough for her to crawl through. She hesitated. "Come to us, May," the voice whispered. "You belong here, like them." The fused faces turned toward her, their mouths opening in unison. She crawled through the gap, scraping her knees bloody on the stone, and felt the walls closing behind her like the jaws of a trap. The orphanage wasn't going to let her go. But May wasn't ready to be consumed. Not yet. May crawled through the narrowing passage, her lungs burning as the stone walls pressed closer with every inch. She could hear the faint scraping of bone and the echo of small voices behind her, urging her to stop, to give in, to become part of the orphanage. But she didn't stop. She burst out of the tunnel into a hallway she didn't recognize, the floorboards warped and slick with moisture, the air thick with the stench of decay. Lanterns along the walls flickered and died as she passed, plunging her into darkness, forcing her to feel her way forward with trembling hands. The building was moving now. Doorways she passed moments earlier vanished when she turned back. The hallway seemed to stretch endlessly, tilting at angles that defied gravity. May clutched the walls to keep from falling, but the walls were breathing again, shuddering beneath her fingertips like a living thing. And then she heard the voice, closer than ever, louder than the beating of her heart. "May, there is nowhere to go. We have chosen you." "No," she whispered. "You won't take me." She broke into a run, her bare feet slamming against the warped boards, the walls seeming to close around her with every step. She stumbled through a doorway at the end of the hall and slammed it shut behind her. For a moment, silence. Then the pounding started. It wasn't fists. It was the building itself, slamming its weight against the door, rattling the frame until splinters rained down on her shoulders. May looked around frantically for an escape. She was in the kitchen now, the same room where she'd once seen Caleb steal food guided by the whispers. The dumbwaiter. She sprinted to it, yanking the small wooden door open. It was barely big enough for her to squeeze inside, but it was her only chance. She crawled in, pulling the rope with all her strength, hoisting herself upward as the door behind her loaded off its hinges. The orphanage screamed. It wasn't just a sound, it was a vibration, a pressure that rattled her bones and threatened to crush her heart. But May kept pulling the rope, desperate to reach the upper floors before the building swallowed her whole. The dumbwaiter creaked and swayed as May dragged herself upward, her palms slick with sweat and blood from the frayed rope. Below, the building's guttural roar rose and fell like the breath of some enormous predator. She didn't dare look down. When the dumbwaiter reached the top, she tumbled out onto the wooden floor, gasping for air. She was back in the upper wing now, the east wing, her wing. But it wasn't the same. The walls seemed taller, the ceiling farther away. Windows she remembered were now bricked over, and faint black symbols, like the ones she'd seen carved in the chamber below, were etched into the plaster, glowing faintly in the moonlight that bled through the cracks. May stumbled down the hall, searching for anything, anyone who could help. But the orphanage was silent now, as though it was holding its breath. She found herself at the matron's office door. It was ajar. She pushed it open and stepped inside. The room was lined with filing cabinets, stacks of brittle papers piled high on the desk. The stench of mold and dust burned her throat. May began rifling through the documents, desperate for answers. That's when she found it. A leather-bound ledger, its pages filled with neat, looping handwriting. It was a record of every child who had ever stayed at the orphanage, hundreds of names spanning decades. But the entries weren't just names. Next to each one was a date and a symbol, the same black markings from the underground chamber. May's hands shook as she turned the pages, recognizing the names of the missing children. Caleb's among them. His date was marked, his symbol drawn. And then she saw her own name. The date was blank, but the symbol was already there. A sharp creak sounded behind her. May spun to see one of the matrons standing in the doorway, her face pale and expressionless. "You shouldn't be here," the woman said softly. May took a step back, clutching the ledger to her chest. "What is this? What are you doing to us?" The matron's eyes darted to the walls, then back to May. "We're not doing anything," she whispered. "The building is—" The dumbwaiter creaked and swayed as May dragged herself upward, her palms slick with sweat and blood from the frayed rope. Below, the building's guttural roar rose and fell like the breath of some enormous predator. She didn't dare look down. When the dumbwaiter reached the top, she tumbled out onto the wooden floor, gasping for air. She was back in the upper wing now. The east wing. Her wing. But it wasn't the same. The walls seemed taller. The ceiling farther away. Windows she remembered were now bricked over, and faint black symbols, like the ones she'd seen carved in the chamber below, were etched into the plaster, glowing faintly in the moonlight that bled through the cracks. May stumbled down the hall, searching for anything, anyone who could help. But the orphanage was silent now, as though it was holding its breath. She found herself at the matron's office door. It was ajar. She pushed it open and stepped inside. The room was lined with filing cabinets, stacks of brittle papers piled high on the desk. The stench of mold and dust burned her throat. May began rifling through the documents, desperate for answers. That's when she found it. A leather-bound ledger, its pages filled with neat, looping handwriting. It was a record of every child who had ever stayed at the orphanage, hundreds of names spanning decades. But the entries weren't just names. Next to each one was a date and a symbol, the same black markings from the underground chamber. May's hands shook as she turned the pages, recognizing the names of the missing children. Caleb's among them. His date was marked, his symbol drawn. And then she saw her own name. The date was blank, but the symbol was already there. A sharp creak sounded behind her. May spun to see one of the matrons standing in the doorway, her face pale and expressionless. "You shouldn't be here," the woman said softly. May took a step back, clutching the ledger to her chest. "What is this? What are you doing to us?" The matron's eyes darted to the walls, then back to May. "We're not doing anything," she whispered. "The building is—" May's heart pounded as she clutched the ledger tighter. The matron stepped into the room and closed the door softly behind her, as though afraid of being overheard by the walls themselves. "You need to leave," the woman whispered. May shook her head. "Not until you tell me the truth. What is this place? What are those symbols? Why are the walls—" The matron cut her off with a trembling finger pressed to her lips. "Lower your voice," she hissed. "It listens when you speak its name." May swallowed hard, glancing around at the shadowed corners of the room. "It?" The matron nodded, her hands twisting in the hem of her apron. She looked older now, weaker, as though the weight of the orphanage had been crushing her for years. "This building was never meant to be a home," she said. "It was built as an offering." May's stomach turned. An offering? To what? The matron closed her eyes. "There is something buried beneath this land. It has been here long before us, long before Vermont was even a word on a map. The men who built this orphanage, they found it, and they struck a bargain." May stared at her in disbelief. "A bargain for what?" "For survival," the matron whispered. "This town was dying. The soil was barren, the winters unforgiving. People starved. So they built this place brick by brick, sealing the thing below inside these walls, and in return, it feeds, quietly, without ever leaving this ground." May's voice cracked. "It feeds on children." The matron's face twisted in shame, but she didn't deny it. "They chose children because they are forgotten," she said, "because no one comes looking, because their fear is pure." May felt the ledger heavy in her hands, as though it had absorbed every life it had recorded. "You help it," she whispered. The matron's lips trembled. "We don't help. We endure. Do you think I want this? I tried to run once, but it doesn't let you go. We are bound to it. And now, so are you." May stepped back, the room spinning. "No, I'm not staying. I won't." The matron looked at her with pity, as though she had heard the same defiance many times before. "You don't have a choice, child," she said softly. "None of us ever do." May's breath caught as the matron's words sank in. She clutched the ledger like a weapon, but deep down she knew it was useless. The building was awake, and it was hungry. A low groan rippled through the walls, the floorboards shuddering beneath their feet. The matron froze, her eyes darting upward. "It knows we're talking," she whispered. "We've lingered too long." May backed toward the door, but the wood warped before her eyes, stretching and twisting until it became another section of smooth wall. "No," she gasped, pounding on it with her fists. "Let me out." The matron grabbed her arm. "You can't run. You have to hide. It's claiming time." "What does that mean?" May demanded. Before the matron could answer, the walls split with a sound like tearing flesh. From the cracks emerged thin, shadowy tendrils, writhing like the fingers of 1,000 hands. They swept across the floor and ceiling, searching, probing, pulling at anything they touched. May screamed and tore herself from the matron's grip, diving beneath the desk as the tendrils lashed through the room. The matron didn't move fast enough. The shadows caught her around the waist and yanked her screaming toward the wall. She clawed at the floor, her fingernails tearing free as she was dragged backward. May reached out instinctively, but the matron only met her gaze, shaking her head. "Run," she mouthed. Then the wall swallowed her whole. May clamped a hand over her mouth to keep from crying out. The tendrils swept the room again, searching. One brushed against the desk where May hid, and she bit down on her knuckles until she tasted blood. Finally, the shadows receded, disappearing back into the walls with a sickening squelch. The orphanage fell silent once more. May crawled out from under the desk, her body trembling. She knew now the matron had been right. There was no escaping, not we. Well, the building was awake, but May also knew something the matron hadn't. She wasn't going to hide. If the orphanage wanted to claim her, it would have to fight. May's hands still shook as she stepped into the hallway, but her fear was hardening into something else now. She wasn't going to hide. If the orphanage had swallowed all those children, if it had claimed the matron right before her eyes, then hiding only meant waiting to be devoured. She needed to find a way to end it. The building seemed quieter now, as though it was confident it had broken her spirit. But May had been listening. She remembered what the matron had said. It was built as an offering. It was sealed in. If it could be sealed, it could be unsealed. And if it could be unsealed, it could be destroyed. May gripped the ledger tighter and began retracing her steps. She moved quickly but carefully, noting the symbols carved into the walls, the faint grooves glowing like veins in the moonlight. She had seen the same symbols down in the underground chamber. They weren't decorations. They were bindings. As she studied the markings more closely, May noticed that some were older and deeper than others, carved into the original stonework, but others were newer, painted in the black tar-like substance she'd seen in the chamber below. If she could break them. The building groaned as though it could sense her thoughts. May didn't stop. She tore a candle sconce from the wall and used its iron edge to scrape at the nearest symbol. The tar peeled away in chunks, releasing a foul, acrid smell that made her gag. The walls shuddered violently. Good. She moved to the next symbol, hacking at it with all the strength she had. A low, guttural voice filled the hall. "May, stop." She didn't. The floorboards cracked open and thin, shadowy tendrils slithered toward her feet. She jumped back and smashed the sconce into the wall, obliterating the binding mark. The entire east wing convulsed. May staggered but kept going. She knew now what she had to do. Break every symbol. Release whatever was trapped beneath the orphanage, and pray it was enough to kill the thing before it killed her. May charged down the corridor, the ledger clutched to her chest and the iron sconce gripped like a weapon. Every wall she passed was marked, the black symbols glowing faintly as if alive. She slammed the sconce into the next symbol with all her strength. The tar split open like flesh, spraying a hot, viscous fluid that hissed as it hit the floorboards. The orphanage screamed. The sound was so loud it rattled May's bones. She dropped to her knees, clamping her hands over her ears as the walls pulsed and cracked around her. Plaster rained from the ceiling. But she didn't stop. She scrambled to her feet and attacked the next symbol, gouging it until the walls shook violently enough to send chunks of wood and stone collapsing around her. "You don't understand," the voice thundered, deeper and angrier now. "We are your shelter. Without us, you will be nothing." May spat at the wall. "I'd rather be nothing than you." The floor buckled beneath her feet, pitching her sideways. She crashed into the wall, barely able to stay upright as the hallway twisted unnaturally, bending like the spine of some great beast. Tendrils burst from the floorboards and wrapped around her ankle. She screamed, slamming the iron sconce down onto them until they released her, leaving a slick black residue on her skin. May limped forward, desperate, breathless but determined. She smashed another symbol, then another. The air grew hotter, heavier, as though the building itself were sweating. Every step was harder than the last, the orphanage pushing back, reshaping itself to trap her. Doorways vanished the moment she neared them. Staircases reversed, sending her back where she started. Entire walls shifted, corralling her like prey. But May had been lost in this labyrinth before, and she refused to give in. She tore into a side hallway, spotting 3 more symbols etched along the wall. She smashed the first, then the second. The third was higher, near the ceiling. She jumped, clawing at it with the edge of the sconce, chipping away until the tar spilled out in thick rivulets. The orphanage roared again, louder than ever. May didn't know how many symbols were left, but she knew she had to find them all. Before the orphanage found her first, May staggered down the corridor, her legs trembling, the iron sconce slick with black residue. She'd destroyed more symbols now than she could count, and the building was falling apart around her. But it wasn't dying quietly. The walls heaved like they were breathing, expanding and contracting, bending the hallways into grotesque shapes that defied physics. "Enough!" the voice thundered, reverberating from every direction. "You will not break us." May didn't slow. She drove the sconce into another mark, tearing it open. Black tar sprayed her face and arms, burning her skin like acid. She bit back a scream and stumbled onward. That's when the orphanage changed its tactics. The floorboards split in front of her, not with shadowy tendrils this time, but with something worse. Hands. Dozens of skeletal hands reached up from the void, grasping at her ankles, clawing at her legs with jagged fingernails. May fell hard, the iron sconce clattering away. The hands pulled her downward, trying to drag her into the blackness below. She kicked and thrashed, sobbing, but their grip was iron. She could feel them trying to pull her through the floor, as though the wood itself were turning liquid. And then she heard the voices. The children's voices. "May, join us. We're waiting." Her heart shattered. She could hear Caleb among them. "No!" she screamed, clawing at the boards. "I'm not going to be one of you." She lunged for the sconce, barely snagging it with her fingertips, and swung it wildly at the arms. One by one, they recoiled, retreating back into the abyss until the floor sealed itself again, leaving May sprawled on the boards, gasping for air. But the orphanage wasn't done. As she pushed herself up, the walls around her shifted, forming doorways where there had been none. Through one, she saw the children standing in a perfect line, their faces calm and inviting. Through another, she saw the matron, alive and smiling gently, her arms open wide. "May," the matron whispered, her voice soft as a lullaby. "You don't have to fight anymore. Just come home." May's chest tightened. She knew it was a trap, but the orphanage was done playing, and it was forcing her to choose. May stood frozen between the doorways, her heart pounding so loudly it drowned out the distant groans of the collapsing orphanage. On her left, the children. Dozens of them, bathed in soft light that didn't belong in this place, Their faces were serene, smiling as if they hadn't been swallowed by the walls at all. On her right, the matron. Her expression was warm, loving, the kind May had longed for all her life. "May," the matron said again, holding out her arms. "You're safe now. It's over. You can rest." May's throat tightened. She wanted to believe it. She wanted to step through that doorway and feel those arms around her. But she remembered what she had seen in the chamber below. The children fused into the walls, their mouths locked in eternal screams. She looked back at them now, and their smiles seemed too wide, their eyes too still. "May," Caleb's voice called softly from the line of children, "please, we're so lonely without you." Her breath hitched. "Caleb." He stepped forward, small and pale, his arms outstretched. "Come with us. It's not so bad. You won't be afraid anymore." May clutched the iron sconce tighter, the edges biting into her palms. This was the orphanage's last trick. It couldn't kill her if it couldn't break her first. She stepped forward, and the children's faces brightened. The matron's arms reached farther, her expression so tender it hurt. But then May stopped. "No," she whispered. The smiles faltered. "I saw what you really are," she said, her voice rising. "You're not Caleb. You're not the matron. You're it. You're the thing in the walls." The illusions flickered, their forms rippling like reflections on water. "May," the matron said again, but her voice was wrong now, deeper, guttural. "Do not defy us." May raised the sconce. "I will." She swung it into the doorway, shattering the illusion like glass. The children vanished in a rush of cold air, the matron's image distorting into a mass of black tendrils before dissipating. The hallway was empty again, but the orphanage roared, angrier than ever. And May knew it was coming for her with everything it had. The roar that followed May's defiance shook the entire building. Dust cascaded from the ceiling, floorboards splintered, and the walls rippled like the surface of a disturbed lake. May staggered backward, clutching the iron sconce, her knuckles white. She had destroyed the illusion, but she knew the orphanage wouldn't stop. It would kill her now. The air grew heavier, hotter, as though the building's very breath was pressing down on her. Shadowy tendrils slithered from the cracks, thicker than before, whipping violently as they filled the hallway. May ran. She sprinted past collapsing door frames and falling beams, desperately searching for the remaining binding marks. Each one she had destroyed had weakened the orphanage, but she could feel there was still more. If she missed even one, this would all be for nothing. A tendril lashed out, wrapping around her waist and lifting her off the floor. May screamed, clawing at it with the edge of the sconce. She sliced through the slick, tarry flesh, landing hard as the tendril recoiled. She pushed herself up and kept going, ignoring the pain that tore through her legs. And then she saw it, another mark. This one was huge, carved into the archway at the end of the corridor, its black lines pulsing with unnatural light. May didn't hesitate. She slammed the sconce into it again and again, chipping away at the tar until it burst, spilling the same boiling fluid she'd seen before. The entire building convulsed. May fell to her knees as the walls twisted and the ceiling cracked open, revealing nothing but darkness beyond. "You are ending us," the voice bellowed, no longer trying to manipulate her. It was raw now, furious. "That's the idea," May spat. The floor beneath her split open, and she rolled away just in time to avoid being swallowed whole. She could feel the orphanage shifting, collapsing, but there was no time to think. She needed to find the last mark. May forced herself to her feet, running toward the west wing as the building tore itself apart around her. She didn't know if she could make it in time, but she knew one thing: she wasn't going to die inside these walls. May stumbled into the west wing, the floor groaning under her weight as though it might collapse at any moment. The hallway here was darker, narrower, the air thick with a stench so strong it made her gag. She knew she was close. The walls seemed to pulse in rhythm with her heartbeat, their surfaces slick and quivering like exposed muscle. Black tar oozed from the cracks, dripping onto the warped floorboards. May's breath came in ragged bursts. She wiped the sweat and grime from her face and forced herself forward. At the end of the corridor was a door unlike any other in the orphanage. It wasn't wood, and it wasn't stone. It was flesh. The door writhed as she approached, its surface rippling like stretched skin. She could see veins beneath it, black ichor pumping through them. May gripped the iron sconce tighter and pressed her hand against the surface. It was warm. The door shuddered at her touch and slowly, soundlessly, opened inward. She stepped into a cavernous chamber that seemed impossibly large, as though the entire orphanage had been built around it. This was the heart. The walls were alive, covered in the same fused bodies she'd seen in the underground chamber, but now they moved. Eyes rolled in their sockets, mouths gaped open, releasing a chorus of low guttural moans. And at the center of the room was the last binding mark. It wasn't carved into stone, it was branded into a massive, pulsating, heart-shaped mass, larger than May's entire body, suspended by thick cords of muscle that anchored it to the ceiling and floor. The mark glowed with a sickly black light, pulsing like a heartbeat. "May," the voice hissed, no longer everywhere at once but coming directly from the heart itself. "We can give you anything. Safety, family, power. Just stop." May stepped closer, tears streaming down her dirt-streaked face. "No," she whispered. "I'm ending like this." The cords tightened, the heart shuddering violently, and the entire room began to shake. Tendrils lashed out from the walls, whipping toward her with lethal speed. May raised the iron sconce and ran straight for the heart. She knew there would be no turning back now. May sprinted toward the massive heart, the iron sconce clutched like a spear. Tendrils whipped at her from every direction, slicing the air with a sound like cracking whips. One lashed across her shoulder, knocking her sideways, but she rolled and kept going. The heart's glow intensified, pulsing faster, louder, like it was calling the entire orphanage to defend it. The walls closed in, the ground tilting beneath May's feet, threatening to throw her into the writhing bodies fused to the chamber walls. "May, don't do this," the voice thundered from the heart. "We can spare you. We can make you forget. You'll never have to feel pain again." May screamed back, "I'll never forget." She lunged forward and drove the iron sconce into the binding mark. The effect was instantaneous. The heart convulsed violently, releasing a shockwave that threw May across the chamber. She slammed into the wall, the breath knocked from her lungs, and felt the fused bodies grab at her arms and legs, their cold fingers digging into her flesh. "Let me go," she screamed, thrashing wildly. She tore herself free, chunks of skin tearing with her, and crawled toward the heart again. The mark was cracked now, glowing even brighter, but it wasn't destroyed. Not yet. Tendrils slammed into the floor around her, splintering the boards. One wrapped around her wrist and yanked her backward. May slammed the sconce down onto it, severing the tendril, black ichor spraying across her face. She stumbled to her feet and sprinted forward, her lungs screaming for air, her legs heavy as stone. The heart loomed over her now, the glowing mark practically blinding. She raised the sconce again, and the orphanage unleashed everything. Dozens of tendrils shot toward her at once. The floor buckled violently, and the walls themselves began to collapse inward, the chamber folding in on itself like a clenched fist. Saint May screamed and swung the sconce with all the strength left in her body. She struck the heart again, driving the iron deep into the binding mark. The heart shrieked, a sound so high and piercing May thought her skull would split open. And then the floor gave way beneath her feet. She was falling. May plunged into the darkness, the roar of the collapsing chamber fading into a deafening silence. She flailed wildly, her fingers grasping at empty air, her body weightless as she plummeted deeper and deeper. Then she hit the ground. The impact knocked the breath from her lungs. She rolled onto her back, coughing violently, her body screaming in pain. The iron sconce was still in her hand, bent and cracked, but she refused to let it go. She pushed herself up and looked around. She was in a vast cavern. The ceiling was so high she couldn't see it, and the walls glistened with a wet, unnatural sheen. A faint, pulsating glow lit the space, casting long shadows that writhed like living things. May realized with a sickening jolt where she was. This was the place the matron had spoken of. The thing beneath the orphanage. The glow came from ahead. She limped forward, her body trembling, each step echoing through the cavern. And then she saw it. A second heart. It was larger than the first, massive enough to fill the entire chamber, its surface slick and pulsating, veins as thick as tree trunks stretching out like roots through the rock. The orphanage above had only been a shell. This was the true core. May. The voice was louder now, shaking the cavern, coming directly from the heart. You can still walk away. Leave now, and we will spare you. We will erase the memories, the pain, all of it. May clenched her jaw, her entire body shaking from exhaustion and fear. No, she whispered. I'm not leaving until you're gone. The ground shuddered beneath her feet, cracks opening in the rock. Tendrils thicker than tree limbs erupted from the floor, slamming down around her, cutting off her path to the heart. May gripped the sconce, what was left of it, and forced herself forward. If she didn't destroy this heart, the orphanage would rebuild itself, and every child it had claimed would remain trapped here forever. She staggered toward the glowing mass, ready to face whatever waited for her. This was the end. One way or another. May tightened her grip on the broken sconce and staggered forward, her eyes locked on the massive, glowing heart. It pulsed faster now, each beat reverberating through the cavern like thunder, shaking loose chunks of stone from the ceiling. The tendrils lashed at her relentlessly, slamming into the ground and walls with bone-crushing force. One struck her across the back, sending her sprawling to the ground, her vision flashing white from the impact. May. You cannot win, the voice boomed, deeper and louder than ever. You are nothing. We are eternal. May forced herself up, spitting blood onto the rock. Then I'll die making sure you're not. She ran. The tendrils converged, striking like snakes, but May darted through them, sliding under one, leaping over another, her body moving on sheer instinct. She reached the heart and raised the iron sconce high above her head. The first strike buried the jagged edge deep into the glowing mark. The heart shrieked, a deafening wail that shook the cavern so violently May was thrown back. She scrambled to her feet and charged again, slamming the sconce into the wound a second time. The light from the mark flickered. Tendrils wrapped around her legs and torso, lifting her from the ground, pulling her back from the heart. May screamed and swung the sconce wildly, severing one tendril, then another, black ichor spraying across her face. She was almost free when a tendril thicker than her entire body coiled around her waist and squeezed. Her ribs cracked. The pain was blinding, but May didn't stop. She drove the sconce into the tendril, holding her again and again until it released her with a screech. She hit the ground running and lunged at the heart one final time. May let out a scream that tore from the depths of her soul as she buried the iron sconce deep into the center of the glowing mark. The heart erupted in a blinding flash of light. The sound that followed was not just a scream, it was the death of something ancient, something that had lived too long. The entire cavern began to collapse. May was thrown backward as the heart exploded, and then everything went dark. May's eyes fluttered open to a suffocating silence. Her entire body ached, every muscle trembling as if she'd been struck by lightning. She lay on her back, the taste of dust thick in her mouth. When she moved, sharp pain shot through her ribs, forcing her to stifle a scream. Slowly, she pushed herself up. The cavern was gone. She was lying in the middle of what had once been the orphanage's east wing, but there were no walls now. No ceiling, no corridors, no rooms, only rubble. Charred beams jutted from the ground like jagged bones. The floor was buried under blackened debris. The sky above was pale, streaked with grey dawn light. May staggered to her feet, her legs shaking as she stumbled through the ruins. There was no sound, not even the whisper of wind through the trees. It was over. She felt it deep in her bones, a stillness so absolute it was almost unreal. The orphanage was dead. She stopped walking and let the truth settle over her. every child it had claimed. She hoped they were free now. She looked up at the light breaking through the clouds and whispered Caleb's name. Tears streaked down her face, a mixture of grief and relief. She had survived. But as May turned toward the edge of the ruins, a flicker of movement caught her eye. She froze. There, beneath a pile of broken stone, something shifted. May crept closer, gripping the bent sconce, even though she knew it would do little good now. She knelt and brushed the debris aside. A small hand lay beneath the rubble, pale and motionless. Her breath caught. She dug frantically, tossing aside chunks of stone and wood until she uncovered the rest of the figure. It was a child. A boy. But he wasn't Caleb. His eyes opened suddenly, wide and unblinking. His mouth curved into a slow, unnatural smile. "Hello, May," he said in a voice that wasn't his own. May stumbled backward, heart pounding. The boy stood, unscathed, his gaze locking onto hers. "You can't kill us," he whispered, his voice echoing like the walls had once done. "We're everywhere now." May's breath hitched as the boy stepped closer, his bare feet crunching against the debris. His smile was calm, patient, as though he already knew the outcome of this moment. You're not real," May whispered, raising the broken sconce as if it could still protect her. The boy tilted his head. "Do I feel unreal to you?" he asked softly. He reached out, brushing his fingers across a broken beam. The wood blackened instantly, tar oozing from the grain like infected blood. May took a step back, her chest tight. "I destroyed you," she said, her voice trembling. "I destroyed the heart. I watched it die." The boy's expression didn't change. "You destroyed a place," he said. "But we were never just the walls, May. We were the fear that lived inside them." The ground beneath May's feet shivered, a subtle vibration that grew stronger with every passing second. She looked around. All across the ruins, the black tar was spreading. It seeped from the rubble, slithering over the broken beams, climbing up the skeletal remains of the orphanage's frame. No, this couldn't be happening. May ran to one of the beams and smashed the tar with the sconce, but the blackness only clung to the iron, coating it like it was alive. She dropped the weapon, shaking her hands frantically. The boy only watched. "We were confined for so long," he said. "But you, May, you opened the door. You unbound us. We are free now." She stared at him, horrified. "You're going to spread," she whispered. The boy's smile widened. "Everywhere, every wall, every shadow, every place where fear can hide." May's knees weakened, the weight of what she'd done threatening to crush her. She hadn't saved anyone. She had unleashed something far worse. The boy stepped forward again, and May instinctively backed away. "Don't worry," he whispered. "We'll find you soon enough." Then he blinked and was gone. May spun in every direction, but the ruins were empty again, the tar slithering silently into the earth. And she realized with icy certainty that the orphanage was only the beginning. May stood frozen in the ruins, her pulse pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. The black tar continued to seep downward into the earth, vanishing into cracks and fissures, like water into sand. It was spreading, and she was the one who had set it free. Her legs nearly gave out as the weight of that truth pressed down on her. She had risked everything to destroy the orphanage, believing it would save the children's souls. But now the entity was unbound. May dropped to her knees, her hands digging into the dirt, tears burning her eyes. She could still hear the boy's voice, soft and taunting. "We're everywhere now." She wanted to collapse, to let the guilt crush her, but she knew what that meant. If she gave in, they would find her first. May stood slowly, forcing herself to breathe through the panic clawing at her chest. She looked toward the horizon, the dawn sky washing the forest in pale gold. Somewhere beyond those trees, there were towns, cities, walls. The entity would move through them like disease. She couldn't let that happen without a fight. May turned and began walking, her steps unsteady at first, but growing stronger with each one. She would find someone who would believe her, someone who could help. She would warn the world. As she reached the edge of the forest, she looked back at the ruins one last time. The black tar was gone now, the debris still and silent, as though nothing had ever happened. But May knew better. She stepped into the trees, her mind racing. Who would listen? Who could she trust? The authorities would laugh at her, dismiss her story as hysteria. She needed proof, something undeniable. She reached into her pocket and felt the weight of the ledger. The orphanage's records, the names, the dates, the symbols. May tightened her grip on it. This was her key. And then far in the distance, she saw it. A farm, house. The tar-black stain of the entity already creeping up its walls. May froze. It was faster than she thought. May crouched low in the brush, her eyes fixed on the distant farmhouse. The rising sun painted it in warm hues of gold and amber, but the beauty was an illusion. She could see it. The tar-black stain, subtle at first glance, crawling slowly up the whitewashed walls like ivy. It was already here. May's breath caught in her throat. She knew what would happen next. The family inside would start hearing the whispers. They'd think it was their imagination at first. Then they'd believe the voice was trying to help them. And by the time they realized the truth, it would be too late. May clutched the orphanage ledger to her chest, her heart hammering. She couldn't let it spread, not again. But what could she do? She had nothing left. No weapon, no plan. Just a body barely holding together and a book filled with cryptic symbols she didn't fully understand. She glanced back toward the forest, toward the world beyond. If she left now, she could still warn others. She could take the ledger, find someone who would believe her, maybe stop this thing before it consumed everything. But that family, if she turned her back, they would die. May's throat tightened as she crawled closer to the edge of the trees, her eyes locked on the farmhouse windows. She could see shadows moving inside, shapes of people going about their morning as though nothing was wrong. A little girl's laughter floated through the open window. May flinched. The entity thrived on fear, but it would just as easily devour innocence. She could run, she could live, she could find help. But she knew the truth. By the time she returned, there might not be anyone left to save. May closed her eyes and drew a trembling breath. She couldn't keep running, not anymore. She rose slowly from the brush, clutching the ledger in one hand and a jagged branch in the other like a makeshift spear. The farmhouse loomed. Ahead, silent and still except for the faint hum of whispers curling through the open windows, May stepped forward. She was going to end this, or die trying. May crept across the dew-soaked grass toward the farmhouse, every step deliberate, every nerve on fire. The closer she got, the more she could hear it, the faint murmur of whispers spilling from the walls like a dark lullaby. She paused just below a window and peered inside. The kitchen was warm and bright, but there was something wrong with the light. It shimmered unnaturally, as though distorted by heat. A woman stood at the stove, stirring a pot. Her movements were stiff, mechanical, her head tilting slightly as though she were listening to something just out of earshot. May's chest tightened. The whispers. She shifted her gaze and saw a man at the table, his hands gripping a coffee mug so hard his knuckles were white. His lips moved silently, repeating words only he could hear. A soft giggle made May's heart sink. She looked toward the staircase and saw the little girl, the same one she'd heard laughing before. She sat on the steps, staring straight at the wall, her small hands pressed flat against the plaster as though she could feel something inside it. May's stomach turned. The entity had already taken root here. She slipped to the door and turned the handle slowly, praying it wouldn't creak. It opened with a faint groan. May stepped inside, clutching the ledger and her makeshift spear, her ears straining to separate the family's muffled voices from the whispers slithering through the walls. The little girl turned her head suddenly. Her eyes met May's. They were black. "Hello," the child whispered. But it wasn't her voice. It was older, deeper, the same voice May had heard in the orphanage. May froze, her breath caught in her throat. The woman at the stove stopped stirring. The man at the table rose slowly to his feet. Both of them turned to face May in unison, their eyes the same tar-black void as the little girl's. May, the three voices said, together, overlapping, echoing. You brought us freedom, and now you've brought us you. The walls began to tremble, the whispers swelling into a deafening chorus. May gripped the branch tighter. She was already too late. May backed into the doorway, clutching the branch like a spear. Her pulse thundered in her ears as the family stepped toward her in perfect unison, their faces eerily calm. The little girl tilted her head, her black eyes glinting in the dim light. You could have left, May, the voice purred, echoing from all three mouths at once. But you came back to us. You chose this. May swallowed hard, fighting the tremor in her hands. I came back to end this, she said, though the words shook. The man lunged. May swung the branch with all her strength, catching him across the jaw. He stumbled but didn't fall, his head snapping back with a sickening crack as he straightened, unfazed. The woman rushed forward, grabbing May's arm with a grip so strong it felt inhuman. May screamed and twisted, plunging the jagged end of the branch into the woman's shoulder. Black ichor burst from the wound, hissing as it hit the floorboards. But the woman only smiled. The little girl climbed down the steps slowly, each footstep deliberate, her eyes never leaving May. You can't win, the voices whispered. We are already in you. May shook her head violently. No, you won't take me. She tore the branch free from the woman's shoulder and spun just as the man charged again. She rammed the weapon into his chest, shoving with every ounce of strength she had left. The man roared, a sound that wasn't his, and collapsed backward, the branch still embedded in his body. But there was no time to breathe. The woman came at her again, clawing like an animal. May ducked under her grasp and shoved her hard into the wall. The plaster cracked, black tar oozing from the impact. The little girl stopped at the bottom step. She smiled, and the whispers quieted to a deadly hush. You're ours, May, she said softly. Then she lunged with a speed that defied logic. May barely had time to react before He child's small hands clamped around her throat, the blackness in her eyes boring into her like an endless void. The entity wasn't going to kill her. It was going to consume her. May crashed to the floor, the little girl's hands tightening around her throat with a strength no child should possess. She clawed desperately at the small fingers digging into her windpipe, her lungs burning for air. The girl's black eyes stared into hers, wide and unblinking. You freed us, the voice whispered, echoing inside May's skull. Now you belong to us. Stop fighting. Let go. May's vision blurred as the woman stepped closer, her head cocked unnaturally to one side. The man still lay sprawled across the floor, but his body twitched as if he were about to rise again. May's hand fumbled at the floorboards, searching for anything, and her fingers brushed the splintered branch, the makeshift spear. But it was trapped beneath the little girl's knee. May's mind screamed in protest. She couldn't do what she was thinking, not to a child. But the darkness was creeping into her edges now, the lack of air pulling her toward oblivion. She gritted her teeth and pushed through the haze, her hand closing around the branch. With one desperate heave, she yanked it free. The girl's expression didn't change. Do it, the entity whispered, or you will be ours forever. May hesitated, tears stinging her eyes as she raised the jagged weapon. She didn't want to kill her, but she knew it wasn't the girl anymore. May drove the branch upward, straight into the child's chest. A scream erupted from the girl's small body, high and piercing, layered with 100 voices at once. Black ichor sprayed from the wound as she was thrown backward, releasing May's throat. May gasped, collapsing to her hands and knees, coughing violently as her vision cleared. The woman howled, clutching her head as if she could feel the pain of the child's injury. The man convulsed violently, his limbs jerking as though electrified. May stumbled to her feet, the branch slick with ichor. She looked at the little girl's body on the floor. The blackness was already leaking out of her, writhing like snakes across the wood, retreating. May didn't have time to mourn, because the whispers were rising again. and they were angrier than ever. The whispers became a roar. May barely had time to react before the blackness poured out of the child's body like a living flood, twisting and coiling through the air. It slammed into the walls and ceiling, consuming the farmhouse's interior in seconds, blotting out the light. She staggered back, clutching the blood-slick branch, her heart hammering. And then it began to take shape. The darkness condensed, pulling itself into a single towering mass in the center of the room. Arms, too many to count, sprouted from its body, each ending in clawed skeletal hands. Its head was nothing more than a gaping void, its voice rumbling from everywhere at once. "You cannot kill us," it thundered, the walls trembling. "We are the fear that binds this world together." May tightened her grip on the branch, forcing herself to stand her ground. "Then I'll tear you apart one piece at a time." The entity lunged. Its massive arms swept through the room, splintering furniture and walls as it tried to crush her. May dove to the floor, rolling under the blow, splinters cutting into her skin. She came up on one knee and thrust the branch into the creature's side. The weapon sank deep, and the entity let out a scream so powerful the glass windows shattered instantly. But it didn't fall. Instead, it lashed out, one claw catching May by the arm and hurling her across the room. She slammed into the wall with bone-jarring force, the ledger flying from her hands and skidding across the floor. Pain radiated through her ribs as she dragged herself up, gasping. The entity loomed over her, growing larger, its form rippling with rage. "You gave us freedom, May," it hissed, "and now we will make you our vessel." Tendrils shot from its body, slamming into the walls and floor around her, cutting off every possible escape. May's eyes darted to the ledger lying just beyond the creature's shadow. The book held the symbols, the only things that had ever bound this entity. If she could get it, she might have a chance. May clenched her teeth and prepared to run, knowing the next few seconds would decide everything. May's pulse pounded like war drums as her eyes locked onto the ledger lying in the corner of the farmhouse. It was her only chance. The entity loomed above her, its shadow swallowing the room. Its many arms clawed at the walls and floor, ripping through the farmhouse as though it were made of paper. "You can't stop us," the voice thundered. "You are already ours." May crouched low, her breath shallow. She had only one shot. She sprinted. The entity roared and sent a mass of tendrils crashing down toward her, the floor splintering under the impact. May dove, sliding across the debris-strewn floor just as the black appendages slammed shut inches behind her. She reached the ledger and snatched it up, rolling onto her back. She flipped the book open with shaking hands, pages of names, dates, and strange markings blurred in her vision until she found what she was looking for, the same binding symbol that had been carved into the orphanage walls. May dragged a nail across the floor, gouging the planks as she copied the intricate design. Her hands trembled as the creature advanced, but she forced herself to keep going. The entity lunged, its maw opening wide. May slammed the tip of the branch into the freshly carved symbol. The floorboards glowed with a blinding white light. The entity screeched, its form convulsing violently. The glow crawled up its limbs, peeling away the blackness like burning skin. May scrambled to her feet and jammed the branch deeper into the center of the symbol, screaming with all the fury and fear pent up inside her. "Go back!" she roared. "Go back!" The light intensified, engulfing the farmhouse. The creature writhed and thrashed, its many arms disintegrating into ash. "You will only delay us," it snarled. "We will rise again." May pressed harder, every muscle straining. Not today. With one final scream, the entity exploded into a storm of black shards that dissolved into nothing. May collapsed onto the glowing symbol, her chest heaving, the world spinning around her. She had done it, or at least she prayed she had. The farmhouse groaned as though it were alive, every wall and beam shuddering violently. May dragged herself upright, the ledger clutched to her chest, and staggered toward the doorway. The glowing symbol still burned on the floor behind her, the planks cracking under the pressure as if the earth itself wanted to swallow it whole. May didn't wait to see if it would. She bolted out the door just as the roof collapsed inward, sending a plume of ash and splintered wood into the dawn sky. May hit the ground hard and rolled, coughing as dust filled her lungs. She forced herself to her feet, every muscle screaming in protest, and stumbled across the field until she was a safe distance away. She turned back. The farmhouse was gone. Nothing left but a smoldering crater surrounded by shattered timbers. May's chest rose and fell in uneven bursts as she watched the last of the flames die down. For the first time since the orphanage, she felt the faintest flicker of hope. Maybe it was over. But deep down, she knew better. She opened the ledger and flipped through the pages, her fingers tracing the faded symbols. The binding spell had worked, for now, but the entity's final words echoed in her mind. "We will rise again." May closed the book and looked at the horizon. She couldn't stop. If the entity had spread beyond Vermont, and she was certain it had, then there would be other places, other walls hiding the whispers. May felt the weight of the ledger in her hands, a key and a curse all at once. It held the knowledge she needed, but it also painted a target on her back. She glanced once more at the ruins of the farmhouse before turning away. The forest was quiet, but May knew it wasn't because the world was safe. It was the kind of silence that came when predators were lurking, waiting for the right moment to strike. She tightened her grip on the ledger and began walking. This wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. May walked for miles, the forest slowly giving way to winding dirt roads and then small towns. Each step was agony, her body bruised and battered, but the fire in her chest kept her moving. She had a mission now. Every wall, every whisper, every shadow hiding the entity's presence, she would find them. She would burn them out one by one until there was nothing left for it to cling to. The ledger became her guide. By the time she reached the nearest town, the sun had dipped low on the horizon. May sat at a bus station, hunched over the book, flipping through the pages until her eyes ached. Patterns emerged, names and symbols linked to places far from Vermont. Old churches in Pennsylvania, abandoned hospitals in Michigan, mining camps in the Dakotas. It had always been everywhere. May traced one symbol with her fingertip, a cold weight settling in her gut. She was only one person. She couldn't possibly destroy it all. But she had to try. A bus pulled up, its brakes squealing. The driver eyed her suspiciously as she stepped aboard, clutching the ledger tightly to her chest. She sank into a seat at the back, her gaze flicking to every corner, every dark patch where a whisper might crawl. She barely slept that night, and when she did, she dreamt of the little girl's black eyes staring through her. May woke before dawn, heart pounding, and checked the pages of the ledger again. One location stood out, an abandoned psychiatric hospital on the outskirts of Ohio. The same symbols from the orphanage were scrawled in its margins. She knew where to go next. As the bus sped along the highway, May stared out the window at the passing towns. Every building looked like a potential host, every face a potential victim. The entity was out there, waiting. But so was she. May gripped the ledger tighter, a quiet promise burning inside her. She would become the hunter, and if the entity ever dared whisper in the walls again, she would be there to silence it. The bus pulled up to a lonely stop just outside a sprawling forest. May stepped off and stood in the chill morning air, the ledger clutched in her arms like a sacred artifact. Ahead of her, half shrouded in mist, loomed the psychiatric hospital. Its jagged silhouette rose above the tree line like the bones of some ancient beast. Windows gaped like empty eye sockets, and ivy clung to its stone walls as though trying to strangle it back into the earth. May's breath fogged as she walked toward the crumbling iron gates. Each step brought a familiar pressure in her chest, a heaviness she hadn't felt since the orphanage. The air was too still. No birds, no insects, just the distant creak of rusted metal swaying in the breeze. They were here. She could feel it. May pushed the gate open, the screech of the hinges cutting through the silence. She stepped onto the cracked courtyard and looked up at the hospital's looming facade. Whispers slithered across the back of her mind like icy fingers. Welcome back. May's jaw clenched, but she didn't slow. She walked up the weed-choked stairs, pulled a piece of chalk from her pocket, and began carving the binding symbol onto the doorframe, the same symbol she had used to destroy the farmhouse. She had learned from her mistakes. This time, she would be ready. May finished the mark and tightened her grip on the ledger. The door loomed in front of her, its paint peeling, its wood soft with rot. She took a slow breath and pushed it open. The darkness inside was absolute. May stepped over the threshold, her heart steady, her voice low and resolute. "I know you're here," she whispered, "and I'm not afraid of you anymore." The whispers rose like a storm breaking. 100 voices, layered and shifting, filled the halls, echoing from everywhere at once. "We were waiting for you, May." She stepped deeper into the asylum, the dörtel closing softly behind her. Whatever waited in the shadows, May was ready to face it. Because she knew the truth now. This war was only beginning.